I want to normalize like sexy men as the selling point of dishware and dish.
You mean like Mr. Clean?
Yeah, but you call him Mr. Clean's one thing. We're calling him Scrub Daddy is the whole.
Scrub Daddy should be a side brand of Mr.
It's the after hours, Mr. Clean.
Butterscotch.
Hey everybody, welcome to episode 394 of Coffee with Butterscotch, the game dev comedy podcast of Butterscotch Shenanigans. I'm Seth and I'm the games programmer.
I'm Adam, I'm the webs programmer.
I'm Sam and I'm the artiste.
And this is a show where we talk about life, business, and working in the games industry. Today is December 14th, 2020. And before we get started, we have a warning. There's going to be profanity on this show.
Yeah.
Were you going to say something, Adam?
No, I was
feel
like,
it.
my mouth was about to just start moving, and then I saw you just like put the clamp on it. You're like, no, you're not squeaking through this profanity.
Tell it, you were about to just launch into a volley of cursing, and I was like, let me stop you right there. We got to get this warning out.
That was good.
We'd also like to thank our supporters over at moneygrab.bscotch.net, whose monthly donations help to keep the podcast running. So thank you very much for that. We got a lot to talk about this week. A lot. Okay. Starting with, I guess, sequins.
Yeah, I got a life story.
So let's get into this.
I got a life yarn to unspool for you. So the other day, Diana was sitting down at the kitchen counter and she's working on an art project that involves some sequins. So if you're not familiar, sequins are just giant pieces of glitter, essentially.
Yeah. I was also going to describe them as giant glitter.
Yeah. So giant glitter that has a hole in it so you can, you can put it on stuff and sew it on stuff as opposed or glue it or whatever. So she's working on these things and she says, hey, you might go over here and look at this real quick. And right on the counter in front of her are a couple of these open sequins boxes, which look like little clamshells that are full of sequins. The bottom part's full of sequins, and then she's got like 2 or 3 of them open. So I walk over and I'm looking at the thing and I make a hand gesture.
Yep, I knew
I knew this was
probably just because it's a clamshell. So I just sort of backflip catapult
way over there. Yeah.
Yeah, sequins just go exploding into the sky. Okay,
did you hit all 3 of the sequin clamshells, or just one?
No, just the one.
Okay,
and I'm immediately like, damn it, because Diana has frequently referred to my hands as dad hands when it comes to like making improper like errors on my phone or whatever. Your thumbs are too big to properly type on a touch screen. And then that's recently been extended to any sort of basically non-dexterous clumsiness is dad hands. Which I think mom hands are sort of the inverse, where they're flame-proof and like that sort of,
they can protect anyone from anything.
Yeah. So
although dad hands can catch babies that are flying off of something.
Yes.
Just like instantaneously.
Different skills. Yeah. So
I've seen it.
Yeah. So, after I do the sweeping gesture to shoot these sequins all over the place, which I don't know who designed this container to be perfectly catapultable, but there it is. I reach over and I'm like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. I reach over and start gathering them back up. And I go to put some of the ones I just got back into the little clamshell thing. And I knock over another one and then shoot them again. And she's just like, oh my God. Can you just go? And I was like, I'm trying to help. Let me help. And she's like, don't
help anymore. You're Mr. Magooing all over these.
It felt like an infomercial scene, like those ones where you're suddenly so clumsy that it's like, how? It's not that I didn't see these. I could see them. I feel like
if you've got something like glitter or sequins, then the kind of container that they're in should not have a leverage point that makes it so that a slight move just flips the whole container.
They should be as low profile as possible. Ideally, like a screw cap that you take off
a screw cap, not like a snapping cap that you have to like pop off, because then of course glitter is a gentle unscrewing that you can then set the cap to the side.
Yeah, who did
low profile?
Who did Satan design these sequins?
This is why you need neurodivergent people in the design room, because people who don't have ADHD, are probably a lot less likely to fling their hands into an open clamshell, right? But if you bring in just people with ADHD, you're like, let's have them be part of the design process. Because I would look at that instantly and be like, I'm going to knock that over.
I'm going to flip that over.
Exactly where that's going. Yep.
Yeah. So, this is why diversity is important, when you're doing stuff, because you got to see things from all lenses.
Yeah. I mean, it would be better for everybody if it was a screw cap. I'm just saying. If you're designing something that needs to be contained and that if spilled will sort of erupt into a
Although screw caps have their own, because I was holding my my littlest cat because she likes to be picked up and put on a shoulder, you know. So I was one hand removed while I was holding onto her, but I needed to get her pills out of the, you know, the pill container with the childproof safety cap. And so I was like, whatever, I'm strong enough probably. So I just like used my right hand and held onto it and pulled the cap down and turned it. And I was like, oh yeah, I got it, right? But then I like tried to lift it off and it didn't come off. So I was like, oh fuck, I guess I fucked it up. So I flipped it upside down. I was like, I'm gonna push it down and turn it, you know. But it turned out it actually was open. There's just because it just like holds it a little bit, you know. So then I just dumped pills everywhere.
So you basically you opened it and then just turned it upside down.
Actually, I didn't think it was open because it was still like kind of jiggly instead of like actually coming off. You know?
It reminds me if you like,
You know-
think you could open a protein shake or something, and then like you actually realize you need to shake it, put the cap back on, but you don't put the cap
Didn't
back
do
on.
all the way,
So you just shoot whatever that liquid is inside.
I did that with a chocolate milk container in middle school or high school but I didn't even close it. I just like thought I had closed it and I just started shaking it and
Just blast.
people did not like that.
Yeah,
Just fire hosing chocolate milk all over your classmates. Now, you know that saying about like, you know, don't mistake incompetence for maliciousness.
Yeah.
You know, but like they're oftentimes hard to distinguish.
Oh yeah.
I feel like that maybe also applies to like clumsiness and just bad decision making, you know, because it's like Sam, I wouldn't describe you as clumsy.
No, I'm
but
not
somehow
usually
you always end up covered in peanut butter or something,
It's
right?
true.
But it's because you've oftentimes will create a situation for yourself like, oh, I was like putting peanut butter on this thing. So I just precariously balanced this like peanut butter knife on the edge of this thing that I was about to interact with. And then you know,
Punch it.
karate chop, flip it into your face. So it's like once you've set up a precarious enough situation for yourself, then it doesn't matter whether you're clumsy or not. Shit's going down.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Right?
Yeah, I don't think I'm clumsy. I think I'm like self trapping, you know, like I'm just constantly creating booby traps myself, which to be fair, I've gotten much better at as I've gotten older. Like I literally notice now.
You're like, well, I'm about to trap myself.
Yeah. And Diana's gotten really good at it because of course she's been around for just a while of these. So we were putting up a little like wreath decoration thing. It's like a little banister, you know, garden.
Oh yeah, that thing. Yeah.
That thing, that thing that you wrap.
Banister wrap you do.
Yeah, I was drinking a cup of coffee, and then I just set the coffee. So I'm on the other side of the staircase, and I reach through and just put the coffee, you know, on the other side, and we're kind of wrangling this thing. And Diana just looks at me for a sec, and then she looks down. She's like, "You're gonna need to move your coffee." And I was like, I forgot that it was there because, of course, I put it like through the step. I couldn't see it anymore. Because of course, if as soon as that garland comes down, it's just going to hit that coffee and just shoot it all over the place, which was accurate because it did fall about a minute later.
Yeah, I think I must have trained myself over time to kind of like to avoid those scenarios.
Yeah, I'm getting
But
better.
in like this weird like kind of deep way that must have been informed by just fucking things up enough, you know. But because I'd actually noticed this week when I was like I'd moved to our kitchen island to start prepping something, and there was some other stuff there. But it was like it wasn't in the way actually, right? But I felt really uncomfortable, and so I just pushed it all even further away. But it wasn't like it just felt bad, you know, that it was there.
It's a signal.
Yeah, and I was
Your
like, I
brain
wonder
is-
if this is something that like I've just like internalized over time, some kind of like this emotional reaction to like when
Things
I'm
being
about to work in
precarious.
a space that there's a precariousness, you know.
Yeah, I think that's why I don't do well with clutter. Actually, weirdly enough, I'm very very
I hate
organized and very tidy.
I'm not organized. I just throw everything away.
Yeah, I'm sort of I'd say medium on the organized, but very tidy. And so it's like I just don't have things around because they're
traps.
That's how traps happen. Yeah.
Because the more things you have, the more likely you're going to end up like an infomercial person where you're just like tangled up in a blanket with like a frying pan flying
Shooting
out
sequins
the
in
window.
the background. Oh my god.
Yeah, because that's just well, I guess Diana's now going to have to chalk this one up in her brain of like, okay, clamshell types of containers, that's another trap. So now she can be on the lookout for that.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Hope yeah.
Things that are
activity.
catapult shaped, you know, just
Yeah, I don't just who's building those? Don't.
yeah.
Which honestly, this is how I feel about wine glasses. Like,
Oh, yeah.
what is?
Oh, yeah.
What?
Terrible design.
What is this?
Well,
you
the
can
whole
get the ones that's like stemless, right? Where it's literally just like the top part of a wine glass. It's like, yeah, give me that.
That's what I use. Yeah.
Well, the whole
But why are you
point though
putting
is
this-
because you're supposed to not heat up the wine with your hand.
I just don't believe it matters enough, you know.
I mean, it definitely doesn't because whenever they do taste tests, wine connoisseurs
Nobody
can't
can
really tell
tell.
apart. But
Yeah, and also like who's just like full gripping the stem. You know, people still hold
Yeah, they
the
still.
bottom.
Yeah,
of
exactly. Yeah, nobody
Yeah,
holds
so
by the
like, come on. Or how about this? How about this? Here's a wild idea: mugs.
mug wine,
better handles.
Just put wine in a
I
mug
don't know, man.
because it's got a handle and it's insulated, so it'll retain its
we're
temperature.
about to get the most hate mail from people that we've ever received.
Wine in a mug, it makes the most sense out of anything I've heard of all day.
I don't disagree.
I just got some essentially stemless wine glasses, but they're kind of smaller that I just use for every drink except for hot ones because it's not insulated well enough for that. But
Because you don't have a handle
doesn't
like
have
a
a handle,
mug.
yeah. And I got mugs for hot stuff, right? But like for literally everything else, it's just basically a stemless wine glass. Because there's something satisfying about that shape. Like
It's good shape.
curves in at the top, you know?
Mhm.
And if it's
Little
small enough so
taper.
you can hold it really easily and nicely, you know, then you just, I don't know, there's something really good about it. And
Problem is cleaning though.
don't knock them over. Well, yeah, as long as it's big enough that you can clean it too, which is because actually these ones are pretty short, so I don't need to have to like reach my hand in. I can just like,
Yeah,
stick-
no, I don't trust it because the last stemless wine glass I had when I was cleaning it, it just exploded again. Who knows?
I don't think that was
What
the
trap?
stemless
I'm just
wine
gonna
glass
say-
aspect. I think it was just the handling glass.
Listen, I'm gonna engage in a little bit of victim blaming on this wine glass because I can't possibly have been responsible. I mean, obviously, given my history, there's no way that this is my fault. Just dexterous,
It does seem unlikely.
absolutely dexterous. So swooping this thing, and then it just shattered, and that shape makes it so that if the glass shatters while you're washing it, then it will cut you because you're in motion and the shape tapers in, right? So there's no way like you're going to sort of move into
Your hand is in a glass globe.
Exactly. And so it scooped out a piece of my pinky, which was not enjoyable. So I don't really do those anymore. Again, probably just a
How hard are you scrubbing this thing?
that was the thing. I don't recall it being particularly feisty.
I think both of
Yeah,
you guys.
well, let me ask
just,
you- let me ask you this.
You just
Let me
have
ask you this.
outside strength, so you just don't realize how intense.
That's true.
Here's a question for you, Sam. How many mugs have you shattered while washing them?
I used to
Probably.
a lot.
Probably not.
Well,
You
I guess-
shattered mugs?
Not the mug. No. I haven't shattered mugs,
That's what I thought.
but I've shattered
Mugs are
lots of
thick.
glasses. Yeah.
Normalize mugs for every beverage.
Normalized mugs.
That's the train that I'm on.
What
today.
kind of
I'm
a
with you.
sponge are you using? Are you using a soft sponge or a scrubby sponge?
This is just a soft, dishwasher.
See, that's the problem because it makes you feel like you got to push hard. You got to get a scrub daddy.
A scrub daddy.
Scrub daddy. It is one of the best. It's got to come from an infomercial. It's insane, but it's one of the best things. We have one, and now we can't go back. It's this little yellow, circular, very wiry kind of sponge, but it's made out of this material that when you put cold water on it, it stays really rough, and when you put hot water on it, it gets soft. So you can like choose the level of abrasiveness you want. Right? So that's really cool. But the reason it's called Scrub Daddy. Actually, I don't know why it's called Scrub Daddy.
Because it has
Is
the
because
nice
It's got a
okay.
face in it. It's got a face. It's like they've cut out like a mouth and two eyes, right?
What?
And if you get the box, and you look at the back of it, they show a person putting a spoon in its mouth, like to clean this, which very unnecessary, but hilarious though, right? And so that's just part of the brand, right?
Wait. So you're saying it's not
What
just
are you
like
talking-
it's
It's like a
not
face.
just an embossed face. You're saying it's part of the
No, it's
design. is that
punched
it
all the
has
way through. So it's like
holes.
it's the smiley face. But yeah, we can shove stuff. And honestly, I think the holes make it worse because then it's kind of
Yeah.
it doesn't last as long, right? But it is hilarious, and it still lasts a long, long time.
Scrub daddy.
And again, like we can't go back now because
Because you got your scrub daddy.
it's so good. And when you want to vary that level of abrasiveness, you just choose your water temp and you do it that way. And because I found also that like I still break things all the time, it's usually because it slips out of my hands, because it's covered in soap. But I used to break things by handling them more often. But it was because I was like scrubbing, But with the scrub daddy, your daddy does the scrubbing for you.
Whenever you say scrub daddy, I'm just imagining Mr. Clean, but with like leather straps and a wig or something.
They could have gone a little harder in the branding, I think, but I feel like they nailed it though because it's just like a cartoon smiley face, right? Like that's all it is. So the branding of like Scrub Daddy next to this just cartoon face,
It's hard to forget.
it works really well. So
I would have
anyway,
normalized like
that's,
sexy men as the selling point of dishware and dish.
You mean like Mr. Clean?
Yeah, but
Yeah.
but you call him Mr. Clean's one thing. We call him Scrub Daddy is the whole
Scrub daddy
other-
should be a side brand of Mr.
It's
side
the after hours, Mr. Clean.
After Mr. Clean After Dark. All right, now we got it. Before we get into questions, we also need to talk about Oreos.
Oh yeah, I have a.
So let's hear.
I have a life story. It's about pets. So I'll make it quick because I know sometimes we all like our own pets more than other people do. But so I've got this ancient cat. She can't eat much stuff because she's got bad guts, so she has to eat this horrible, disgusting like vet food, right? So as a consequence, she just thinks she's starving to death all the time. Food obsessed, right? I'm trying to switch her on some new food, which is a slow process, and I also feed her less to like make sure it stays, so she's thinks she's starving to death a lot more than usual. So last night, I'm getting ready to go to bed. I have to go downstairs to do something. Come into the kitchen to turn off the lights, and there's this cat on the rug with an Oreo, just fucking chomping away. Right? So
It's a good cat.
So I saw this and I was like, what is happening? Because it's an Oreo,
Where did she get an Oreo?
So then I look at so I take it away, and she's eating like half of a fucking Oreo, which is just hilarious because cats are, what are you doing? And also it's cocoa in there, although Oreos are mostly not food. So I wasn't too worried about it, and no vomit this morning. So I guess this cat could eat Oreos, but I don't recommend trying it at home. So I went to the counter and I was like, how did she get into this? And on the counter was a packet of Oreos, and she had managed to actually just like pull up. She didn't even like chew into it. She managed to like pull up the fucking flap.
She peeled the flap back,
She peeled back the flap and got one out.
daintily out of the sleeve.
Yeah, and then just was like on the floor eating it. But then but then there was also a bag of chips on the floor that she had also knocked down and tried to get into, but was unsuccessful. And then also we had a bowl, like a small bowl of peanuts on the counter, and a big bowl of grapes. And so as I was scanning everything, I looked over and I just noticed there were a whole bunch of fucking peanuts in the grapes. And I was like, okay, so that means she also went for the peanuts, but she was
kitchen scavenging.
Fucking chaos. So I was trying to imagine, like, what did this look like when she was like up here, like throwing peanuts around, and then knocking things to the floor. I mean,
she probably shoved a bunch. She didn't have any molars, so I'm sure she got some peanuts in her mouth and then just like went to go eat grapes and then just couldn't you can't get more grape in
and
there.
grapes are like grape skins are toxic. I'm pretty sure for cats and dogs, So but also she's a cat. An obligate carnivore.
Yeah, I don't know what she's doing.
And she's over here trying to eat peanuts and Oreos. I don't know what's happening.
Anyway, this cat loves bread though.
She does like bread and cookies. So
she's a carb.
Yeah, when we had your cats for a couple of days, they tried
she got your bread.
Broke into the bread box and then ate the corners off the whole loaf, which was insane.
That's what she was.
I can't even believe I'm describing those. Eats the corners off a whole loaf. Doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, we have found many a bread or cookie like item at some point on the floor because she got it off the counter or something. But we never leave something unwrapped for this reason, But she'll just like chew into the fucking plastic,
She's very much like
open a sleeve of Oreos, I guess.
Brownie pan. I feel like she's like the edge of the brownie, sort of a person.
Yeah,
never the inside.
But I think it's also I think she likes the smell or something because it's not. I mean, they're carnivores.
They don't even. They can't even taste sugar, right? They don't have a.
They can't even taste sugar.
Yeah.
Like
what the fuck Yeah, they don't have a sugar.
They don't have sweetness receptors.
Because they don't need it because they're obligate carnivores.
So
they just have to eat. Yeah.
Can a cat even? What the fuck does an Oreo taste like to a cat?
I don't know. I was thinking it's as if she was like a starving monster, just like eating everything she could get her face into. So
they must have some kind of like fat.
Yeah, probably fat.
Receptors,
I guess there's probably some kind of fat in Oreos, right?
Probably. I mean, there's got to be something in Oreos.
Oreos are weird because Oreos they're vegan. Yeah, there's like.
Yeah, if you ever hear somebody like, man, I switched to a vegan diet, but I feel like shit. It might be that they've literally just been eating Oreos for the past 2 weeks.
They're vegan and they're also they don't have any gluten in them.
They're the perfect snack.
It's like almost no matter what your food stuff is, you can eat Oreos. But the question is that a flex or is it because it's not food? And I don't know.
That's true. Yeah.
Which one of those two it is? Though they are delicious.
If Oreos aren't food, then
what's the point of living?
What's the point of living? They sure have a lot of calories for not being food.
They sure do.
I'll say
that's true. I guess if it has calories, it is food, right? That's how
it's mostly sugar, probably.
That's how that works.
All right. Well, let's get into some questions. We got enough time to hit maybe even 2 questions today.
Oh, generous.
So let's get into it. These questions come from our listeners over at podcast.bscotch.net. Highest upvoted question comes from Fraser, who says, once Crashlands 2 is finished, is there any genre you'd want to try next? Does the existence of the Game Changer tooling stack push things in any given direction? P.S. I'd love a Bscotch roguelike. A bit to play it, but more to hear your take on the design challenges of the genre. Well, that's some good news.
There is Quadrupus Rampage.
There is one, Quadrupus Rampage. It's actually the second game we published. It's from 2013, so,
beware of that.
Yeah, 2013.
It's a different time.
2013. I think it also has been played by more people than any of our other games, including Crashlands.
Oh, yeah, it's free to play on mobile, so it's,
yeah.
I think
And,
still
and it
popping
was
And it was
from a
launched
time
back when you could, get people to play your games on mobile.
back when there were only 1,000 games coming out a week on mobile instead of
barely
7 to
any at all.
10,000. Yeah. So we really snuck in when the market was hot.
Yeah, there is
It
one.
didn't make us a lot of money, but it got a lot of plays. That was the game that taught us we don't have the I don't know what you'd call it, but we don't really like making free to play games.
There's a certain expertise in being able to accept the monetization constraints of free to play and actually definitely apply them to a game's design because they're part of the monetization is the design. And
it feels like
I find it very
you're
annoying.
You're designing a store that happens to be a game.
Yes.
Yeah, well, it's you're using your powers for an alternative purpose, right? Because as a game designer, your whole job is learn all the different tricks of how people's brains make them feel good, right? And then you make a game to do that, to make people feel good as they play the game, right? But then when you make a free-to-play game, now you say, how do we employ those tricks to make people
Feel good about spending money.
just give us as much money as possible? How do we just continuously exploit all these little nooks and crannies and the wrinkles of the brain to extract as much cash as possible?
I never enjoyed it.
And we didn't like that.
No.
But yeah, so the
was not fun.
Quadrupus Rampage does exist. It's basically an undersea beat 'em up. You're beating up fish. That's it. That's sort of the whole thing. So if you do want to play that, it's a good time. It's a good time.
It holds up. It's fun.
It is a rogue light, though. Your progression from a given run does carry forward in certain ways into your future runs.
Yeah, and I do personally love the roguelike genre. It's one of my favorite grouping of things. I think because of the fact that you can get away with so much in the design space there since the game resets over time. As we've talked about a little bit in the past, you don't have to worry about sort of scaling blowout issues. That's actually usually the point, is allowing players to figure out how to or get lucky by getting some things put together that make them just completely ridiculously powerful, which would be a huge problem if the game didn't end, right? And then you replay. So I love that sort of content because it lets you be just a maniac, which is super
Yeah, we were
fun.
talking a few weeks ago about how the problem with power loop driven game design is that when the loop runs out or becomes naked and bare, right? That keeping that balance so that things stay fun is already a challenge, like through a game play session. But then at some point, there's just nowhere higher to go. And the roguelite's whole thing is basically saying, cool, once we get there, just stop. Start over.
And restart, make it cool.
Start back at zero.
Yeah, so I love those. But yeah, as far as what would happen or what we want to explore afterwards, I mean, Seth and I were actually just talking about yesterday, I think, because the reality is the Game Changer is so ridiculously good and has sped up just so many aspects of, just making complicated, interesting, again, unique authored content at scale, which is the whole point of it. That it does seem like it'd be a shame to me to just sort of, we've talked in the past about possibly moving to 3D or moving to Unreal or whatever else and all these things. And even just being able to make even just a spin-off of Crashlands, that had a slightly different angle, but we used a lot of the same base.
Like a 3D angle.
Well, yeah, no, not a 3D angle, because I think that's if we stick in the kind of just in this space that we've developed so intensely, it's almost like the thing I was talking about with Ragnarok, God of War, which is so much of the initialization of a game is just getting the damn thing to work, figuring out how it works, getting it to work, and then building so many tools to support content pipeline for that. And then, in most cases, you end up pivoting away from that genre or trying something else entirely. And I really my hope is that we can do at least one other thing kind of with the Crashlands 2-esque game changer stuff we've built up, either like an adjacent game or something like that, that utilizes a lot of the same tech, because we would get to go almost just straight into the figuring out the fun part stuff.
Well, there's a few layers to the tech that are generic enough, right?
Yeah.
That they don't, I mean, they still need to be used like in this engine context and so on, because that's where all the code is and all that. So it's not like transplantable into a 3D engine or something like that. But in terms of like what kinds of games we could make with it, that's not really a problem, right? No. Because there's a whole bunch of Crashlands 2 specific stuff too, right? But at the core, like those tools are game agnostic. So yeah, it would be a shame to not be able to like really leverage that from the beginning of a next title. But that probably would be, Crashlands 3 or something. But I think the other cool thing about that though is like, or whatever kind of an episode 2, whatever we want to do.
You can't make third games. It'll be Crashlands 2 episode 1.
Yeah, that kind of a thing.
And then episode 2, and then we'll probably be done for about 20 years, I think.
And then don't starve it. Just call it Crashlands Together, and then it make
only if it's multiplayer though. Yeah. But I guess the other thing though is that if we do something like that, because the problem is always when you're making a new kind of game or switching to a new engine or having to throw a lot of your tech away or whatever, is that you again like all of your constraints are back, all of them, right? And you don't get to create any kind of slack anywhere, right? So like right now, like at least for the first part of development of Crashlands 2, basically up until now, Sam had tons of slack. He could go learn more stuff. He could try new art approaches. He could develop new pipelines. Like there's all kinds of stuff that he could do to push basically his discipline and knowledge really far forward, because Seth's over here like building up the tools and like there's nothing that Sam can do in the game yet and that kind of thing, right? And I think similarly, if Crashlands 3 is built largely with the tech that we've now already have, because the tech enables a wider, diverse array of kinds of content without requiring a lot of code changes, then that suddenly Seth has slack for that development cycle, where now he can push something forward, right? Or a bunch of things forward, and we can get new kinds of tech. So that's where we could, re-explore multiplayer again. We could like try other kinds of things, and stop being stuck in this either fully synchronous thing where just nobody's got slack, or where Seth in particular has basically never had slack, right? And over the past few weeks, he's actually had these like brief moments because like Sam and Jenny are running ahead and like working on stuff, because they've got enough tools now that they can just keep on doing content, where like the pressure is dramatically relieved in a lot of ways, right? But still, there's like this infinite list of like the stuff we already know has to happen before the game changer and the game are engine complete. So being able to not have that for a game dev cycle would be cool. So I think that's what I would be advocating for post Crashlands 2 would be
100%.
Would be some kind of a sequel-ish kind of thing, just leveraging the shit out of all the tech that we've already made.
Yeah, I'd really like to try a multiplayer thing, I think, in particular. Whether it's roguelike or just a crafting and kind of survival game or whatever else. But let the programming side focus on those just stupidly huge problems, and we'll figure out the rest using the fact that we have sort of conceptually locked in a bunch of these things that previously were very hard to know how to describe with data, which now we kind of have.
Yeah, well, we had talked about doing multiplayer in Crashlands 2 originally, but what we kind of learned over the course of working on that was that for starters, the design of the game was ambitious enough that
can't do both.
We were gonna have to develop so much new tech to be able to execute even a single player version of the game, that trying to do that with multiplayer mixed in, it was just too big. It was gonna double our production time at least. And who knows if we would have actually made a good game, at the end of it, because we were also running into all these design problems of, Crashlands, I think was fairly unique for its time because of how tightly it pushed on narrative and like open world crafting games, right? Because you didn't really have that as a dual concept, and also that it looked and felt like a survival game, but it was actually an RPG, right? Because like there was no permadeath, there was no starvation or anything like that. You know, your character is fine, and you're just moving through the world and powering up like you do in an RPG, like a Final Fantasy kind of a game or something like that, right? And so if we wanted to carry over what we thought were kind of like the best parts of Crashlands, which is like this open world but narrative driven, you know, crafting, blah blah blah. Then trying to figure out how to reconcile all of those things in a multiplayer context, we were just bumping into that so many times of like, okay, what about quests?
Yeah, it's
like,
really narrative. Narrative in a multiplayer context is very challenging to figure
and
out.
given that we have quests that like change the world, right? Like a quest happens and like somebody, or like what if a quest requires a player to get an item? The player gets the item and then they log out of the server and they were the one with the quest item, right? And so you've got to do all kinds of weird workarounds to figure out how to make it so that like things can still progress. Or like what if somebody logs out and then they come back into the server and then a bunch of quests have progressed because other people played? Like, are they just behind now? Or like what if they were in a place that no longer exists because maybe a quest caused it to stop existing? You know, there's just
And what
an infinite
happens when
list
a
of-
new player comes, because it's also a progression based game, right? That's meant to be like a dozens of hour gameplay experience.
Yeah, things move forwards, right?
And
Like
so
you
what if
learn
you
new
invite your
things.
buddy to come play with you and they've never played before, right? And so they hop into your game. What does their onboarding look like, right? What is their, do they just get equipment? Do they just get hand-me-downs, you know, from their person, just like jump way ahead and just have the other player teach them? Or do we try to like have that be our problem?
Yeah.
Just the sheer number of like design challenges to
It's really
marrying those two things together was enormous.
if you're allowed to simplify the concept of the game with and sort of move the narrative pillar out, either completely or almost completely, then it makes a lot of these things far easier to think about. But then that to us was like, that doesn't fit what if I bought Crashlands and I loved it, and then there was Crashlands 2, but there's literally no narrative arc in it whatsoever. That seems and no quests, no character.
Yeah, probably the way it would have had to have been. And I think we had some pretty cool like design ideas, but still most of it was just big question marks. We were like, I guess we'll figure this out later, you know?
Yeah.
But I think the only way that it really could have worked and still have been like a meaningful successor to Crashlands that was the same kind of game was if like there was like, it was still a single player game that you could invite people to play and they just like appear wherever you are or something, right? And we don't do it like that player can give you some stuff if they want to or whatever, but we don't like reset anything. We don't like give them a different experience going through. Might even force it same screen, so we don't have to deal with like, what happens if people are changing the world in multiple spots? And but like, if we constrained it enough, we could actually potentially do it.
Yeah, but then you have to ask the question.
But
After all those constraints, is it good? Is the fact that multiplayer is good? It's like, no.
But also from a biz dev perspective, it creates new challenges, right? Because being a cross-platform studio is a very intentional business security choice that we've made, which is that Crashlands 2 right now can play on any of the devices that we've been on before.
And it's just one step away from being able to play on more devices.
Yeah.
Like we've designed all of the controls and everything so that we can easily adapt it or migrate it to whatever.
Yeah, and that was an intentional choice because our survival as a company hinges on basically riding the waves of chaos of the games industry, right? Like who's doing the most for indies right now? Is it Xbox? Is it PlayStation? Is it Apple? Is it who is it, right? And we need to be able to catch whatever wave is currently cresting, and we can only do that if we're adaptable enough to move. That's one of the things that we actually realized about our current web tech, which isn't even close to the complexity of multiplayer. It's just very simple web stuff. Is that while that's actually pretty straightforward for us to maintain and keep working for ourselves, if another platform has a requirement like, oh, you have to use our tech to like sync saves or whatever, or if they don't want, or if they want it to be an exclusive and don't want something else, if they want a separate player pool or whatever it is that they want to have us do, right? Then it actually hurts us to have that thing because
it makes our lives more complicated.
It makes things more difficult because it actually becomes less, despite actually being more portable, because you could play it anywhere and it's the same and you can like sync your saves and stuff. It actually becomes less portable from a business standpoint. And I think multiplayer's that problem times like 1,000 because the technical challenges involved with that are so much higher. And then the constraints that are put on you from the platforms is also a lot higher. Yeah.
Yep. And of course, there's a problem of a multiplayer game. If it's entirely multiplayer, then it lives and dies by its player base because of the network effect, right? So like as soon as people start getting tired of the game and leaving, then the incentive for other people to leave goes up, and then you have this sort of negative feedback loop. And so you want to try to make your game so that it can be played without other players and it's fine. But then at that point, maybe don't even worry about the multiplayer side. Just make a really good single player game.
So it's all very tricky.
Yeah. So I mean, I think in terms of genre, the Game Changer doesn't actually demand anything. Like we could make a card game the next game, and the Game Changer would be awesome for that. Actually,
I love me some roguelike deck builders. So sign me up.
We can make a roguelike. We could make a platformer. We could make a sim. I mean, we could do anything. But yeah, something that we also kind of learned, and like we kind of talked about this, I think it was last week, about the problem of indies basically making a game that people really like and then getting bored of that concept and then just going and making something totally different, right? And that's, your audience won't come with you to the next thing if it's too different from the prior thing.
Unless you've got such a strong IP that a significant fraction, still not most, and not even close, but a significant fraction will. So you take like a Hearthstone, right, where it's like, all of the Blizzard IP, right? Or if you take this like Marvel Snap game that everybody on mobile is playing, right? It's like, yeah, sure, you can just stick Marvel on anything, and a whole bunch of people will give it a shot, right? And that's something we realize is that one of the things that we have to try to do is sort of take advantage of the fact that people like Crashlands by making more Crashlands stuff, right? And if we're lucky someday, having done that enough, we'll have enough IP power, that we can take more gambles on stuff that's adjacent to it, or like different genres or whatever, but using the same IP so that people will still come give it a shot because they love those characters, they love those stories, and they want to see them, and they like them enough that they'll be like, okay, I'll take a risk on this thing that I normally
I think that's the trick. Like, here's the thing. I haven't played Overwatch. If Overwatch was a StarCraft first-person shooter, I would have picked that shit up
instantly. Yep,
instantly, right? Because like I don't know about like this like giant gorilla dude and like a robot person and like some girl in a mech suit. I don't know who these people are. I don't care, right?
Mm-hmm. They look really cool from the outside, but you don't know them.
They look cool, but they're in a bubble, And I do play first-person shooters from time to time, but not really much. And I need a good reason, right? And so, like, if I see something that kind of looks like a reskinned Team Fortress 2, which is basically how I feel about, a game like Overwatch, like a class-based shooter, right? Mm-hmm. Then, like, I need something extra. And if I can be a Zerg, if I can be a Protoss zealot with my psionic blades, instead of just some guy with a knife or whatever is in Overwatch, then I'm all on board. And so that's where I think a lot of the, jumping of genres can really happen is if you've got a strong enough IP that you can just bring that with you. And so that's where because with the Warcraft universe, it was Warcraft as an RTS for 3 games, and then as an MMO for a long time, and now as this card game, right? And so, and each of those games kind of builds on the universe and the characters, and it makes the entry point so much easier. Because I also did pick up and try Hearthstone, right?
Yeah, I did too. You've seen those, those characters. You want to see what they're doing in this context, right? Or what the feel is in this context. And
I heard good things about it, and it has a lot of that same kind of like weirdly like whimsical kind of vibe that Warcraft kind of has, and very colorful and stuff like that. And so I tried it out. But you can't just make something totally different that has no recognizable characters, totally different genre, and expect people to just kind of like blindly dive into it, Yeah,
I mean, I would love to make a Crashlands roguelike of some sort. I don't know what the fuck that even means, but that's a fun combination of words.
Yeah, Crashlands dungeons, whatever the fuck that is, but you're just dungeon diving and that's also the fun part too, is like when you do take, like if you do have a strong enough IP that you can make that leap, that also gives the opportunity to highlight other stuff in a way that's more acceptable to people. Because we were talking about Quadrupus Rampage, right? that character, that Tack, the quadrupus that you play as, we have a whole like lore that comes in there with like the quadrupy and like this war that they fought, right? All on the same planet as Crashlands. Like we're already trying to kind of pull the IP together, but it's just with different characters each time, and the context is too different. But in OG Crashlands, like you come across the quadrupy as a kind of NPC pretty early in the game. They're a core part of it, right? And so, of course, if you haven't played Quadrupus Rampage, which most of our Crashlands players hadn't, because they're just too different of games.
Yeah.
Then you'd be like, oh fuck yeah, the quadrupy, right? Because like you love seeing that character that you enjoyed, being involved with, again, right? And so for Crashlands 2, we're doing that with Crashlands 1, where we're taking the same like species of NPC, and we're taking a few of the characters, or at least things related to characters, and pulling those forward so that as a Crashlands player, you can be like, oh yeah, it's that, like it's this. I remember that story, and you get to have that experience. But it's still kind of hard in those contexts to like with a game like Crashlands to be like, I want you to really like one of these quadrupy, right? Because like we could try to mesh the stories in enough that like you feel like you really know them, right? So we could have a spin-off with that quadrupy. But if you haven't played as them, it's not the same. But if you go if you hop into a roguelike though, and you can like choose like Flux, which who's the main character in Crashlands, or choose Tack, the quadrupus, or whatever. Right? But now it's all in the same universe, and you get to actually like experience stories as those characters. Then that makes it easier to jump into even more tangential things and actually broaden out the IP.
And that was, we actually had a kind of a prototype version of a game like this. As something we were working on after Crashlands that we ended up not making. I think we worked on it for maybe like 2 months or something.
But not a while.
No, it was the home slice or
it had a code name. Yeah,
it's home slice. It's basically Quadrupus 2.
Yeah, so we had the Polari from Crashlands. We had Quadrupus, and we had like
the Shalook, which is like a clam people.
Yep, and Blood Bars, which are like walrus people. And it was essentially like taking place in the oceans of Wonope after the events of Crashlands. And it was intended to be like a class-based kind of multiplayer sort of roguelike, kind of brawler thing. But yeah, I think similar to what we ran into with Crashlands 2, we had to design in so many things in terms of the game and the tech that we just kept running into these kind of insurmountable things that would have been too expensive for us to put together.
Our eyes were too big for our technical skills and stuff we'd already made.
Well, and like there were things in Crashes, we're like, oh, that was so great to have. Like it was so great to have fishing and farming and like building a base, and like we want to make this multiplayer roguelike also have all of that stuff too. And so it was one of the, it's just like feature creep the game, and it just ended up being, I think it played pretty well.
Oh, moment to moment was fine. Yeah, moment to moment's always fine. That's easy.
Yeah, but production was just very fraught.
Yeah.
So, all right, we have time for one last brief question from Mimmabip Gourkee, who says, "What advice would you give to a developer who wants to start doing QA?"
Ooh, it was funny. I actually talked to a studio head a few months ago who had just launched a game, and they did. It's a very big game that went on to Apple Arcade, and they had farmed out their QA, kind of similar to how we had started with it, right? Hired one of these external QA companies and done that. And yet at the launch, they had run into just a huge number of issues that they were like, what? I thought we were paid for QA, I will say
that's true. They did pay for QA.
They certainly paid for it. Doing it in-house still has been one of the smartest, I think, overall studio moves we've made in terms of fully integrating that chain of stuff. And Jordan, who heads up our QA stuff, and then all of our part-timers who do the kind of playtesting have been phenomenal in terms of like just having a set of people who we actually kind of build the skills into and stuff like that has been just really ridiculously good in terms of actually ensuring quality, again, not just paying for quality assurance, but ensuring quality. So yeah, I would say if you're trying to get started on it, it starts as basically as simply as figuring out actually first how to more regularly get builds out and deployed. Because if you can't do that, then there's not really a point of having QA yet, because you can't even get routine builds out.
There's nothing to test.
Yeah. And then it's like getting some kind of patch notes put together. You do those two things, and then you're ready for it someone at some point to play the thing and give
Yeah, your ability to test is so contingent on your pipelines because you're adding a lot of communication channels.
Yes.
Like Sam was saying, you got to deliver builds, and you need to deliver builds regularly enough that they can be tested. Because if you do it, when we first started QA, we did it once a week because everything was manual, which meant that our testers would just come in. They're part-time. They would just come in on Friday for like 3 or 4 hours per person. And they would have an entire week worth of patch notes. So just pages and pages of things that have changed in the game. And they also were testing infrequently enough that, a week has gone by since they last did this stuff. And so it's easy to kind of like forget how to do this thing or forget how to get into the game or, whatever. And so we found that we still got some pretty good stuff at that time, but our processes were just working against us, And so so then we automated our builds, we automated our patch notes, and made it so that we were able to just get a build out. I think especially during the Levelhead days, we were doing like sometimes 4 builds a day. And we would have QA in there, and then we would just like deploy it, and then we just kind of yell over like new build's coming, right? And then 5 minutes later, they update and they're good to go. But then the other part of it is the problem of intake. So if your QA team finds something, how do they get you that information? How is that information screened, and how do you make sure that you're getting what you need? And so we've gone through several iterations of that as well, where at the beginning it was almost like if you see something, say something kind of thing. And the problem there is like everybody has different understanding and ideas of what matters at any given point in development, different standards for like whether something feels right or wrong, that kind of thing.
Yeah, and the content itself is shifting in completion over time. So, you're not necessarily want feedback. You might be able to get voluminous feedback from people about like your build mode system, but it's literally currently being built. And so you're like, I don't need anybody to say anything. I know it's broken. I've delivered it broken. You know what I mean? Like it's not finished yet. And
so we've come up with a bunch of techniques, but I think the two that have helped us the most to get really good feedback is the idea of reporting thresholds, where we basically came up with several kind of degrees of severity. And we say like, okay, a critical bug is one that causes a crash or causes data loss, right? And then the next level is it's just like what we just call a bug, which is something isn't working the way that you would think that it would, right? But it's not like breaking the game for you necessarily, but it's just not a very good experience, right? And then the lowest level is just polish, where you see something, you're like, oh man, like the border on this button is slightly offset compared to the other buttons, that kind of thing. And so at different stages of development, you can say to your QA team, like, okay, because we're working on this system and it's highly in flux, we're just going to stay at the critical level. So if you see anything that's crashing or causing you to lose data, let us know about that, because we shouldn't be deploying stuff that has that problem, right? But everything else is just really fluid right now.
Well, I think that's the most important idea, as you're saying, is being able to ahead of time have explicit and frequently, touching back on the questions of how do things get categorized for action, because all of like the also interpersonal conflict about like, oh, this person doesn't care about the stuff I'm reporting, or like all of that stuff basically comes from a mismatch in what people think matters, right?
Yeah. Expectations and needs, basically.
Yeah, and those all just need to be as clear as possible so that people don't feel like they're shouting into the void on the one hand. Was this question about becoming a QA or about adding QA?
Adding QA.
Well, it's unclear.
Okay.
But it says, what advice would you give to a developer who wants to start doing QA? Which I assume that they're developing their game.
Doing QA.
They want to
getting QA done.
They want to start doing QA on their project.
If you want to become a QA tester, that's a whole other question, which we won't have time to get into.
So if that's your question, just ask it again.
Just ask it again, and we'll talk about that. But the other thing, though, that I was going to say, as like the second part. So the first thing is reporting thresholds and making sure that you're dictating what kinds of feedback that you get. The other part is making sure that the feedback that you do get is actionable. So at the beginning, and for a long time, we just had our QA basically just reporting directly to developer, to me.
So Seth would read all tickets from QA, basically.
Yeah, I would just read them and
Triage, categorize.
And we had guidelines of like, here's how you report a bug. You need these replications. You need to include replication steps. You need to talk about what platform you saw it. It's a list of all of the things that the developer would need to track down the bug, right? Problem is, and we find this with almost anything, it's very hard for any person to understand or tell what other people know or don't know.
Yes.
So if you're a QA tester, you're like, I found this bug, and you're describing something, and then you send that to the developer, you may have described it in a way that makes sense to you, but that the developer's like, I don't know what you're talking about, yes. Right? And so
which is why in-house QA is so important, because over time everybody builds a shared understanding.
Yes, that helps so much. Yeah, but then the second thing we did was we added in an additional step, which is that another QA tester needs to replicate a report before it goes to developer. And what that ended up doing was it made it so that our QA testers end up collaborating with each other, right? Because one of them will find a bug and be like, I found this thing. They'll describe it, and then another one comes in and they try to replicate it, and they'll be like, I tried to replicate this and I couldn't figure it out. And then they start to talk, and then they put together a much more detailed, comprehensive report, and then that goes to the developer, and then we can fix the bug in 5 minutes instead of spending an hour trying to figure it out.
I think it's a really interesting example of sort of, we talk a lot about in the DevOps process, communication being essentially the key for all this stuff, visibility being key for all this stuff. And what's interesting, I think, in that particular case you're describing is that you talk about basically getting the defects in the tickets of the QA system, but instead of trying to solve it by, because what you want to do is not have that basically defective ticket, a ticket that's not operable, arrive at the other end of the pipeline.
Yeah, you don't want to throw the pig over the wall,
but what you do is then is actually just to essentially fake delivery within the same part of the pipeline before it would go to the next stage. So you fake deliver it by giving it to another QA person first.
Well, what you're doing is you're testing.
QA.
You're testing.
You're testing the ticket.
You're testing the ticket.
Yep.
To see if the ticket is working as intended, right? So you use QA do QA on QA before the ticket goes back to the developer.
It's testing all the way down once you get into it.
I think there are two other, core concepts that matter a lot for QA. And I think the most important one is the shift left philosophy, which there's all kinds of it's kind of like agile, where there's specific agile methodologies for managing work, right? And shift left, I'm pretty sure there's a thing that somebody constructed that's called that, but the premise is basically we draw workflows from left to right. That's also right. So the shift left idea is the idea of pushing things upstream,
nice.
Right? And so shifting left, you basically say, well, why do we have bugs? Because QA's job is to ensure quality of the thing that they get, right?
Yep.
What's the best way to ensure the quality, right? Is to not have any bugs in the first place, right?
Just stop coding bugs.
Just stop coding bugs.
Just don't put them in there.
Obviously, that's a truism, and you can't just stop making bugs, right? But the whole point of that philosophy is to say, don't make the bugs just other people's problem, right? Yeah, every time an issue does appear and gets caught downstream, there should be a feedback loop that tries to address the root cause of that upstream, so that whole classes of kinds of problems become less and less likely to happen over time, right? And so that goes into basically now coding and design practices and what collaboration looks like upstream, including the aspect of making things that actually are testable, right? And where QA downstream can get the information that they need, and they have the tools they need to accurately and quickly diagnose issues and get them kicked back upstream again, right? So, because if you basically just say we're just doing our stuff and QA's job is just to keep reporting issues, and that's the whole thing, then that never gets better, because you're just still sending a huge volume of shit downstream, and QA's just doing their best. But they're going to get overwhelmed no matter how good they are if they don't have good enough tools.
And then you're going to get overwhelmed with all their reports.
Exactly. And then because this is also, again, where all the interpersonal conflicts come in between QA departments and dev and design, is the idea that QA is constantly just getting overwhelmed by the sheer shittiness of stuff coming from upstream and then being blamed for missing stuff. right? But also simultaneously being blamed for reporting stuff that is a problem because the developers and designers upstream don't want to hear about it, basically, right? Or
They want to make new features.
They want to make new features. And so the best way to avoid these conflicts are with, again, that explicit upfront triage categorization with QA given the power to do the triaging at that level with the collaborative aspects that you just keep on. So that QA can really kick good stuff upstream. But then otherwise that upstream has part of its actual set of goals is to make QA easier and easier over time so that there's a communication, a feedback loop the whole time. And so, this is stuff where like logging utilities, right? So that and so that people can capture information from the game, even just stupid, seemingly obvious things like, like your QA team should have the ability to record their screen, right? So that they can share a video demonstrating the thing, because that's a lot easier a lot of times than trying to describe it, right? And it should be easy for them to do that, because if it takes them half an hour to put a video together, right?
That's dumb.
They're not going to do it.
Yeah. I think the problem really is that people tend to think about quality assurance as the end of the pipeline, where really it's like,
it's part of the loop.
If it's part of the loop. And if you're looking at any team, any particular person on a team's role is never isolated into just whatever the little pieces where they do the specific work that they are able to do, but they're supposed to be applying those skills to basically inform the rest of the pipeline to make both their work and everybody else's work better. So we talk about quality assurance. It's not quality assurance of the end product. It's quality assurance of the process by which you make products and the end product. And I think until you put those together, then people are always giving quality assurance people to boot and treating it like a separate annoying thing that they have to get past in order to like get a broke ass game out the door. I mean, look at Pokemon. What in the hell? Just what?
Broke as fuck.
That cannot be an integrated pipeline. There's no way. There's no way that's like a well-functioning situation over there as far as QA is concerned. No way.
Yeah, and enough people are hitting the bugs in that game that they don't seem like edge cases.
No, they
seem like that's just how the game is.
Yep.
Yeah. Well,
So
you see this too, because especially with how shitty our industry is at like actual having good processes, since they rely on crunch and other things instead of more careful process management. And at the same time, they treat QA as Seth said, like the end product, right? Or the thing you do last, right? And because of that, they basically are building bugs on top of bad design choices on top of, right? That isn't getting feedback to be fixed early when it's easy, right? Or to address systemic problems early so they don't become really widespread. And so then all of a sudden you have just a broke as fuck thing that has to get resolved. And now you're guaranteed you're going to drown QA. And now you're also guaranteed that the dev team is going to hate getting those tickets, right? Because there's so many of them. They're supposed to be done. They're all tired, et cetera, right? But if you take the constant QAing all the time, the whole time, during all of development, because we started doing QA on Crashlands too, like a month in, 2 months in, something like that. Once there was enough stuff that a game existed at all, we were already doing QA, because that allowed us to fine tune how the whole pipeline works the whole time. So that like now what we have is just this really slick, really nice process where like the feedback that we get from QA is just fucking top notch because they've been doing it for a long time, I think it's this idea that like you should only test a thing when it's ready, because otherwise it's a waste of time, right? It's again this like confusion about what work actually is. Yeah, which is
also, I think it's just optimistic about like your ability to initialize a process effectively.
Yeah, and just like have it be good somehow.
It's not the case that like once you start testing that you're actually doing anything aside from actually just figuring out how to test. And I think that's where the breakdown happens, right?
But I think the other part of it is that people can't stop treating people's work as if they are robots who have like a specific constrained job and like they do it and then that's the end of the picture, right? Because the reality of work is that we're people who have to communicate with each other and work with each other's like different brains and skill sets and knowledge, and we all have to like work to also learn more stuff over time, and then we're all working in some kind of a shared ever-changing context that all of us have a piece of, but not the whole thing, right? And for two people on any part of a work pipeline to successfully accomplish some piece of work together, whatever that is, it can't just be like, oh, cool, look, here's all this work I made.
Yeah.
It's your problem now, right? It has to be from the outset, like, here's how we work together. And that has to be designed, right? And that has to be tested. And that has to be constantly modified over time, because like the way that I like to think about it is that we make things incidentally, right? Like, as in, like, our job as a studio is not to make Crashlands 2 or to make games even. Our job is to create and manage and develop a team that is capable of doing that. Mm-hmm. Because then as a side effect, you end up with games, you know? But
you end up with whatever.
And that's the cool thing is, like, as we've been working on stuff, we see these things where it's like, oh yeah, if we needed to, like, do a pivot because, like, you know, games are going under or whatever, we could already see a path where we could kind of, like, convert this whole team into, like, oh, now we're making web apps or whatever the fuck, right? Mm-hmm. Because we are very aware we're not just building widgets, and, like, people aren't just interchangeable, independent parts that you just, like, swap in and out. You just say, here's this piece of work, now it's your job to do the next part. But the whole thing is just a constant, looping network. And anytime you don't design that and work on that, everybody's gonna have a bad time. You're gonna have a worse product at the end of it.
Yeah. So all that is to say, I think if you're making your game, you're wanting to start doing some QA testing. Start early and just start in the simplest way that you can, because the most important thing is getting the loop started.
Yeah. So you can iterate on it.
So you can iterate on it and just don't ever think, hey, we have QA now, we're good to go. Right. Everything is an iterative process. You need to be continually monitoring. Are we getting the feedback we need? Is our QA getting what they need? Are we producing a lot of bugs unnecessarily? Why? You know, and just start working on that loop. And
remember that games are hard to test because they're experiential and they're combinatorially complex often, right? And as the game grows over time, so does the complexity of testing it. And so if you're not also making tools and practices in your QA team, or even yourself as, you know, performing as QA, if you're not continuing to work on those processes and tools so that becomes also easier over time, then you're going to overwhelm your QA. That is just what's going to happen. And so that's why it's best to start really, really early so that everything is co-evolving as it goes. And that also means that you can't treat QA as like, testing is their problem. My problem is creating or whatever, right? It has to be
everyone's problem.
Yeah, it has to be everyone's problem. So that if QA comes to you, they say, hey, it's really time consuming to like test this questing system because I just have to start at the beginning every time, right? Then your response shouldn't be, okay, I guess we'll just throw more hours at it then, right? It should be, how do I make questing easier to test, right?
Yeah. And I'm particularly proud because I've gotten numerous comments from our QA people that testing Crashlands 2 is heavenly compared to testing the original Crashlands because anytime we make new features, we add
QA tools
testing dashboard, not just for QA, but for ourselves.
Yeah, because that's the other part too. Yeah,
well,
it's like anything that's good for the developer, anything that's good for QA is also good for development.
Yes. It's increasing quality. Who doesn't want that?
If we just say, how do we make it easy for our QA team to just jump from quest to quest, to know everything about all the quests? How do we let them just get an item? How do we let them just, do teleport to anywhere in the world? How do we do any of that stuff? If we make it easy for them, it's easy for us, and then it's easy to develop more stuff in the game, right? So everybody wins. None of it is a waste of time.
Nope.
In fact, it's a waste of time not to do those things.
Truly.
And that's all the time we have for this week. We'd like to thank our producers, Fat Bard and Sampa DaCosta, for putting the podcast together, and thanks to our community moderators who keep our Discord running. To get more involved in the Butterscotch community, just go to podcast.bscotch.net, where we have links to the Discord, a way for you to donate, and links to the archives. Thank you all for listening. We'll see you next week.
Goodbye.